Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today we get to talk about probably the best day that we're going to see all season long for the Minnesota Vikings. And that is coming off of a victory over the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. And it was an exciting game to watch, and the Vikings played extremely well. So really, a lot of positives here. And then this kind of the second half of the show is we'll discuss, what does this mean? I mean, obviously we discussed on the preview episode that this particular game is kind of the Vikings Super Bowl for 2020, right? Being, where they stood in the standings and kind of where the direction they were heading. But now, I mean, there's some hope, I guess. So we'll try to get into that a little bit and see where we stand, following this huge victory that in any other circumstance would have no question marks around it. But because of how the Vikings started the season, we will evaluate kind of how to move forward, knowing what we do after this game. So that's the game plan for today's show, and we will jump right into it with the quarterback position, which is funny because the quarterback position really didn't matter. Right?
No.
It didn't. So, I mean, we could talk about Kirk Cousins, but this is going to be a short snippet for sure because the guy only threw 14 passes.
Right. And none of them were over 10 air yards down the field. So he, was asked to do as little as any quarterback that I can think of this season in a winning effort, right? Kirk did, I guess, he was fine. There's nothing he wasn't bad. He didn't do anything bad, but he didn't do anything good or anything that, an average quarterback wouldn't have done there as well. So you're right. There's nothing much to talk about here about Kirk Cousins' performance. It's just that the Dalvin Cook in the ground game was so efficient that it almost rendered the passing game unnecessary because right. Green Bay couldn't stop anything.
It wasn't worth the risk to throw the football.
No, especially in the wind, correct. And then the Vikings offensive line was absolutely mauling people on the ground. So there was no reason to go away from that, which is kind of weird to think about in 2020 where, right. It's all about the passing. And I've even said before, the Vikings need to become more a pass happy team, play
I stand by that still.
The way, play the way, football should be played in 2020. Yet I think just all the things yesterday with the wind and the weather and it was a perfect Mike Zimmer game to coach because he could, he could really rely on the run game, and then his defense could take advantage of, the conditions and kind of keep Aaron Rodgers in check a little bit.
Right. So I guess one positive for Kirk Cousins is that and to go off of what you said, he wasn't really asked to do anything, but one positive is he didn't allow the elements to phase him negatively.
Sure.
Yeah, right?
Sure.
Yeah. He didn't do anything wrong. I mean, he got the job done.
That's a step forward for him based on the last few weeks. That is a step forward.
I would agree. That's a positive, momentum shifting move, especially considering that, he didn't. This reminds me of a Tavares Jackson, Adrian Peterson type game. You know what I'm saying? Where it's if the quarterback just doesn't turn the ball over or doesn't do anything completely disruptive, you feel good. Just based off of recent history with Kirk, let's move in a direction where we're not throwing back-breaking interceptions. And he didn't do that, and he had the opportunity to as well. So that didn't happen. But really, let's focus on the ground game here. I think it became very clear yesterday that the Vikings are a big wind team. Wind, I mean. Not win, wind. Okay? And I didn't think that was the thing, but that's very clearly a thing based off of, if you're going to build the perfect team to compete in the wind, this is it.
Yeah.
The Vikings have the perfect team to compete in the wind, and they didn't even have to use all of the elements of it. It's not Dalvin Cook was great, and we'll talk about Dalvin Cook for this entire show. But they didn't even have to use Alexander Mattison, one of the best backup running backs in football, perfect asset to have in a big wind game. And I mean, they have Thielen and Jefferson who are good, after the catch receivers as well, guys who are sure-handed and can do something with the ball after it. They weren't asked to do much either, but they have it. And then on top of that, they're two tight ends. I mean, I could not be more impressed with Irv Smith. Straight up. He did everything that a tight end can possibly do and still only have one reception and 16 yards on his sheet. He blocked well, and I know he had that weird phase in the third quarter where the announcers were just as we were talking kind about Irv Smith, he starts making mistakes. Yeah, okay, whatever. But the body of work in this game was exceptional from Irv Smith, Kyle Rudolph, Chad Beebe caught that big third down conversion. I mean, every single player did well, and it just reinforces the notion that this is the perfect wind team. If the Vikings get these conditions, they are at an extreme advantage because this is how you build it. This is I just wish every game was outside.
I mean, there's right. That's the very funny thing about this is that the Vikings are playing indoors for every home game. So they're totally building their team against the elements that they've surrounded the franchise with at US Bank Stadium. But I mean, you're right. Like, Dalvin Cook ran the ball 30 times, Madison 3 times, CJ Ham once. So that's 34 rushing attempts. Kirk Cousins threw the ball 14 times. Like, you don't see that in 2020. And I mean, I have no qualms with the decisions made. Like, I'm not gonna tell Gary Kubiak to throw the ball more with Kirk Cousins in 30-mile-an-hour winds when you're leading the game in the second half. So I have no issues with it. I think, I in a way I want the Vikings to be more aggressive when trying to close out a game, but in those circumstances, you kind of just got to run out the clock and then sort of make Rodgers beat you in those conditions with, essentially only Devontae Adams as a reliable pass catcher.
So when you run the numbers on it, right, you just said 14 pass attempts. He's also sacked 1 time, so 15 total dropbacks, 34 total carries. The Vikings ran the ball at close to a 70% clip.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, get that? Like, I hope that's having the same impact on you guys as it is on
the analytics guys are furious, by the way.
Exactly, and they should be, because this goes against every little detail that they've worked their entire careers to say doesn't work, and it just did. And all it took was 30 miles an hour winds. Like, no big deal, right? But anyways, you look at the strategy that the Vikings came in with. They knew they were built for this, and they just immediately kind of imposed their will from the start of the game. This is how you want every single Vikings game to start. Like, obviously, this is how you want every game to finish. But, like, if you could get the Vikings to churn up clock and, efficiently, but not necessarily efficiently, but effectively move the ball down the field in the opening drive just to set everyone's feet on the ground, this is how you want to start the game. The Vikings immediately had momentum. Look, I know it seems weird because of how spaced out the timing of this game was, because of how long the first, 4 drives were. Mm-hmm. But the Vikings scored they didn't just get 3, they got 7 on
their first 4 drives. Dalvin Cook scored on the first 4 Vikings possessions of the game.
Exactly. Like, that's complete insanity. And it's not, and they weren't doing anything in the pass game at all. Like, it's not like they were playing, magnificent, like, 2020 football. They were playing like 1972, run it down your throat until they stop you football, and they just never stopped them, period.
So, and this is exactly how the 49ers have destroyed the Packers the last 2 years.
Right.
Because this is how, that's the same type of makeup offensively. They run the ball a ton, and they have a quarterback that I would say the coaching staff doesn't trust to just kind of fling it, right? And Garoppolo and Cousins, so they kind of wanted, they would like to make things easier for the quarterback, play action, a lot of motion, that type of thing. And so we saw that with the Vikings. And of course, Ezra Cleveland had a phenomenal game for his second career start. Bradbury was awesome. O'Neal and Reef were also really, really good. Dozier, I think there was the one screen maybe to Thielen or something that was just awful, where I think there was 3 linemen that let one Packers DB through. But other than that, like, I can't even think of a poor, rep by any Vikings offensive lineman. So you're right that, this identity for a football team in like 1974, like the Vikings are set, man. Mike Zimmer was built to coach in 1974. I don't know about 2020, but hey, it worked given the conditions that Lambeau Field saw yesterday. So, a lot of rookies stepped up, played well. A lot of younger guys, did what they needed to do, and then of course you get Dalvin open space. It's gonna work. And
so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, that's just what it is. So there's 2 real, more highlights to discuss from this game, right? And that's Dalvin Cook, who we've been purposefully kind of putting off of here, and then of course the DJ Wanham strip sack at the end of the game that kind of came at the perfect time, and just another one of those young guys like you're mentioning who kind of stepped up in a moment where. Last week, I was questioning if these moments were too big for a lot of these guys. And DJ Wanham is a guy who, right from the get-go, I didn't really give it much of a chance. I thought, if you remember my analysis of him at post-draft, I said he looked like Scott Crichton. And to be honest with you, outside of the guy who just got traded to Baltimore, he's been the most effective pass rusher the Vikings have this season.
Mm-hmm.
And he's done it in key moments too. Like, I understand that he didn't get home in 3 seconds or whatever it was to get that strip sack, but he was there at the right time. He followed Rodgers outside the pocket.
Didn't give up on the play.
Yes, thank you. He didn't give up on the play, which is a big moment for him. And again, that's a huge morale booster. Like, if he doesn't get another sack for the rest of the season, that's fine. But he has this moment to kind of this is his welcome to the NFL moment on the positive side, right? Like, you always talk about kind of the moments where the guy gets the first big hit, right? Or, they, fumble the ball because they weren't carrying it the correct way, fundamentally. And you say, welcome to the NFL. Well, there's the opposite too. And for DJ Wanham, I mean, this is a huge moment. The Vikings have very little pass rush. They've got very little, secondary. They need someone to, like, take an opportunity and run with it. And Wanham is off on the right foot because of one play. One play. And I'm like, the rest of the game was fine too, but one play, he showed that he has the potential to do a lot of different things and do it in crunch time moments, which is something that this team, longs for at every position. It's not just Kirk Cousins that kind of cracks in prime time. It's the defense too. And to see that moment happen when all of us were ready for Rodgers to go down the field and get 7 there and win the game 29-28, just to break our, bust our balls again, he stopped it. So that's a big moment for him in his career. And it's a big moment for the Vikings defense too, who held when everyone thought they were going to fold.
Right. I was 100% on board with, this is going to be a Seattle game all over again. But I think the pass rush was really solid yesterday. Now, Zach, when he came on our show last week, did say Packers offensive line has not been protecting that great, and also mentioned with Bakhtiari, if he's out, it's going to be really bad. And so we both kind of wondered, like, well, which is going to win there? The Packers offensive line, which is struggling, and then Bakhtiari was out, so they only added to kind of that intrigue with how bad that could be, or the Vikings pass rush, which completely inexperienced, and really nobody there has had a reliable stint in the NFL yet. And I think we saw the Vikings pass rush win, even maybe if there was a low sack total there for Rodgers, just because he is mobile and he did kind of use his feet really well to get out of the pocket, make plays, or throw the ball away, whatever have you. But I thought Wanham, of course, was great. I thought Odenigbo had some good pressures. I thought Hercules Mataafa brought up off the practice squad. That was a nice. He had some nice moments in there as well. So there's of course, I think there'll be tougher tests along the way for better pass protection units against them, but nice to see the Vikings figure something out there. And Devontae Adams scored 3 touchdowns, I know, but I am very pleased with how much of I don't want to say non-factor he was, but how well he was contained by this young secondary. If you're going to, I would gladly take 53 yards on 12 targets for Devontae Adams. And the one I actually want to point out is not even contested by a cornerback, but remember down the seam, Eric Kendricks running stride for stride with Devontae Adams, playing the, I think, Tampa 2 down the seam there. That was unbelievable. And so another reminder that Eric Kendricks is still, he might be the best cornerback, linebacker, and defensive lineman on the roster right now, because that guy can do everything.
Absolutely. It's just another great player that, stood out in another big moment. I mean, if that ball gets completed, the Packers might go down and score on that drive. So, a lot of kind of moments where the Vikings in the past, or at least the recent past this season, where they have cracked, they stood tall this weekend. And, that was refreshing to see. But really, this game was about Dalvin Cook, right? We've been talking for about 10 minutes now, and we've basically just sidestepped Dalvin Cook the entire time. Look, this entire game, this entire football game hinges on the Vikings running back. Literally everything. The Vikings ran at a 70% clip. Dalvin Cook was involved in 64% of those rushing attempts. He ran at a 5.6 yards per carry attempt. He had 5 or 6 over 10 yards. He was setting the Vikings up in 2nd and 4 or 2nd and 3, 2nd and 2 positions all game long. He was doing literally everything at a high level. He could not have been better than he was, literally. And it's one of those moments where you start to kind of wonder, is he actually the best running back in the NFL? Right? Like, we have these conversations. We've been having them. We've been saying, okay, yeah, he got paid this much money. He's a top 5 running back, whatever. Straight up, he revolutionized the Vikings offense yesterday. He was. I was back to 2012 immediately, whereas Adrian Peterson running the show and the Vikings quarterback.
But he's a pass catcher.
Right. But he could add that element to it as well. And he also pass blocked efficiently when he was asked to. It was like twice yesterday. But he did his job at every single level of the game. And most importantly, of course, as a running back, when you're running the football, you have to do more than just what your block set up to be a great running back, right? Like, in theory, any professional running back, if the block's set up, you hit the hole, you can fall forward for 4 yards. The guys that are great are the guys who sidestep that first hole because they see 8 yards down the seam as opposed to, 6 yards up the middle. They get that extra 2 because they're just smart. They make that great decision. They see that spat opening up. There's a couple moments where Cook went to the inside, bounced to the outside at the second level. That opened up a block from Thielen, and all of a sudden he was gone 20 more yards downfield. The Vikings' blocking was outstanding, but Dalvin Cook was making the decisions at that second level to turn quality gains that are a product of a good offensive line into, huge gains that were turning into 7 points in every single drive.
It's a tough game for the running backs don't matter argument. It really is, and I'm saying that as somebody who is was on the side of don't pay Dalvin Cook, and I am cautiously still on that side. But man, you can't see that game yesterday and you can't watch that game yesterday and come away with the take that all running backs are the same. It's just impossible to think that after that because. And it's not that Madison. I mean, again, Alexander Madison is not bad, or any of these backup running backs. They're still quality players, and you give them the chances, they're going to produce. That's how the running back position is. But it seems like Dalvin Cook is able to turn a routine 5-6 yard run into something more at a better rate than other running backs do. That speed to the edge, the quick feet he has, changing directions. It's pretty remarkable. So you're right. This is a Dalvin Cook game. And obviously, statistically, it's the best performance of his career, and it would be tough. It would be very difficult for him to top that.
Absolutely. I mean, you just look at all the different things. I mean, you mentioned just like in the simplicity of it, right? He ran the ball effectively, he blocked effectively, and he caught the ball when he was asked to effectively. It was only 2 times, but both times.
But the thing about it was that it wasn't just like the Adrian Peterson game where like it's 1 yard, 2 yard, or 1 yard, right. 2 yards, -2, 1, -2, and then 85. Like it was large chunk after large chunk after large chunk. And we should note this is also an indictment on the Packers' run defense because that's been bad for a while.
Right.
And I think teams are maybe starting to realize some old school football against these Packers is the way to win. The Niners have done it twice in a row now and just destroyed them. Vikings just did it now. If you can get a lead on the Packers early and run the ball on them, old school football beats them. But it's a combination of all those things where Packers bad run defense, and then the Vikings offensive line did a really, really nice job. And I think that group is set up to be great run blockers. Of course, the issue becomes pass protection when the Vikings need to throw the ball. But that was not the case at Lambeau yesterday. That was all it was running the football was the priority, and it worked out.
Absolutely. The thing is that when you're playing a game like this, right, where you're running the ball at a 70% rate, in theory, you think it'd be harder, right? Because the team, the opposition knows what's coming at that point. Like You're not even trying to mix it up. You think that would be harder, but what Mike Zimmer did well, or I guess more Gary Kubiak because he's the one calling the game, is he didn't necessarily care that the Packers knew it was coming. He just straight up trusted the guys in front of him who were doing, run blocking as an offensive lineman is the easiest part of your job, right? All you do is you take one step forward and you got to press forward and keep moving your feet. I know I'm simplifying it. I'm not saying, it's easy to be an offensive lineman. I'm saying, in theory, that's the easiest part of your job. Pass blocking is where it's more difficult because you have to find leverage. You have to drop back effectively. There's so much more.
Pick up blitzes and stunts.
Yeah, there's so much more technique involved, and your feet can get tangled up. There's just so much more that can go wrong in pass production. So when you're running the ball effectively, you're not just, getting the efficiency at that 4, 5, 6, 7 yards per attempt. You're also taking away from the problems that can occur as a result of trying to pass the ball or forcing yourself to pass the ball, as the Vikings have found themselves so many times this year. It's not just, that the Vikings offensive line isn't shrewd pass protectors at this point. It's that they're so good at run blocking and they're so confident at run blockers, right? all former players always talk about that kind of intangible thing, quantify, and that's just momentum and morale, and just how your confidence translates to the football field. This is another game that's we've talked about how this is a big opposition to analytics, right? That's just another thing about this game. Like, you can't quantify the confidence that the Vikings offensive line was getting, knowing that they were going down the field, running the football down their throats, and scoring every single time. You can't quantify that. There's no way to explain, that might not matter down long term, but, a year from now, if Hunter Dozier miraculously turns into this great guard, he might look back and be like, hey, guys, I had this great game in Green Bay. All of a sudden I had confidence. I thought I was a good football player. Like, these things make a difference. And that kind of transitions us into, how to feel about this game, because obviously individually, this is the Vikings Super Bowl. This is the one game remaining on the schedule that every single Vikings fan wanted to win no matter what, because it gives you, the shut up and go away factor with Packers fans. It gives you that, like, I was watching this game with two Packers fans in my basement. I didn't say anything because I know the Vikings aren't a good football team, but they couldn't say anything to me. I was just like, yeah, it's a good football game. Sorry you guys lost. Like, yeah, you're still bad. I'm like, I know. But, like, you lost, so, like, it's over. But at the same time, that feeling right there, and this is kind of, I'll let you introduce the poll, but that feeling right there only lasts for about a couple hours, right? Now it's Monday. Now we're recording this show, and we have to start thinking, okay, now the Vikings are 2-5. The Jets just lost again. In theory, they're now 2 games back of getting the first overall pick. If you are a, Trevor Lawrence, need to have him to continue being a Vikings fan guy, you're probably not happy about this. So tell them about the poll.
Yeah, so this morning I went on the Unbelievable podcast Twitter account, which is not as active as it could be, I'd say. But I was kind of curious about what the followers thought about how you feel about this team. So if you look at the schedule going forward here, and I didn't put this in the tweet or in the poll, but there are a lot of winnable games based on, win-loss record ahead. Now, I know with the Vikings, that doesn't seem to matter too much this year into how they play, right? They seem to play better teams, more competitively at this point. But so I just asked, how do you feel about the rest of the season with 3 answers? Number 1, still hoping for the playoffs. Like, you're still hoping that they can grind this out. They can get on a little winning streak here and make some noise. They'll be featured on that in the hunt group on the playoff graphic, and then they'll sneak in the playoffs as one of those extra wild card spots. Or there's the second option was tank for the high draft pick, so you want them to keep losing games and solidify a high, probably top 5, top 10 draft spot. And then the last one was still unsure, don't really know how to feel, just kind of want to watch this team play, and you'll roll with the punches. And over 50% of our responses right now are still saying to tank for that high draft pick after, now at 2-5. And then, of course, you had right now 23% are still hoping for a playoff spot, still hoping for that hot streak during the season here. And then the rest, which was 1-5, 20% said they're still not really sure how to feel about that question in particular. So I did, before handing it back to you or getting your thoughts on this, I wanted to list off the schedule coming up here to see if that changes how you think about it. Because moving forward here, Vikings have at home versus Detroit, who just got smoked, by the way, by Indianapolis. At Chicago, which, as we know, probably a loss, right? Because Vikings don't win at Chicago. And then 3 straight home games against very, very winnable opponents, which is Dallas, Carolina, Jacksonville, back-to-back. So you got 4 out of 5 here at home. Your road game is against the Bears, who, without the bad juju at Soldier Field, that seems very winnable because their quarterback situation's bad. They can't score points. It's easy to talk yourself into this team getting back into contention, and I believe right now they're the 9 seed in the NFC.
13.
In the NFC, they're 13?
Yeah, they're 13 in the NFC.
Well, that's not correct then. But at 2-5, it's easy to talk yourself into this team being 6-6, going into week 14 or whatever it is. So what do you think about that? What's your thoughts on, do you still team tank? Do you still team kind of compete and try to ride this thing out?
Okay, so one thing that yesterday taught me If I learned anything else, yes, one thing that I learned about my fandom is, to put it concretely, I'm never going to cheer for the Vikings to lose.
I won't either. I
It's
can't do it.
never going to
I
happen.
can't do it.
Because
I never will.
I was watching that Packers game, and granted, I probably wasn't as excited as I typically would be when the Vikings are leading by 2 touchdowns, late in the fourth. I can admit to that because I am self-aware enough to look around and be like, this probably doesn't matter long term. But at the same time, like, I was still filled with joy, right?
But seriously, I mean, it's especially against Green Bay. Like, it'd be one thing if it was like Detroit next week, and it's like, the Vikings moved to 2-5 by winning at home against Detroit.
Right.
Nice. But it's different when it's Green Bay.
So, knowing that, I really can't pick, the hot answer here. Like, I can't say that I definitively want them to tank. Like, I know, like, as someone who can separate himself from his fandom and kind of just looking at football from a fundamental objective point, I know that 2-5 is a bad spot to be. There's very little chance of making the playoffs. And even if they do, there's very little chance of advancing in the playoffs. And ultimately, down the road next April, I'm going to be pissed if the Vikings have the number 14 pick. I know all of those things. But at the same time, yes, you say that schedule, and I'm like, let's do it. Let's win 9 games. Let's try to make the postseason. So, I mean, logically speaking, I'm still for the tank. But, like, emotionally and my human instincts, things that I can't ignore, I want my favorite football team to win. That's not going to change. It's never going to change. And just, despite the fact that this loss isn't as uplifting, this win isn't as uplifting as it could have been had the Vikings beat Seattle and, theoretically beat Tennessee, and they're looking at a 2-loss football team now and in a very competitive position. That hurts still, but yeah, I guess I have to say I'm optimistic because I just saw everything that I hoped to see from this football game. Hoped. You heard me on the last show. Drew, myself, Zach, none of us gave any chance for the Vikings in this football game. I wrote it off completely. I was making fun of my favorite football team. I just saw them do everything I said they couldn't. How can I not be a little bit optimistic? It
sucks because I think 2 weeks ago we kind of closed the book on this conversation, right?
Yes.
I think it was after the Falcons game.
Yes.
Right, because they go into that Falcons game. There was a close call against Seattle, and we're like, all right, well, if they can win this game, they're right back in this. They're that close. They have a bunch of close calls this year, blah, blah, blah. Then Atlanta smokes them at home, and we're thinking, okay, well, this is kind of a lost season. And to me, the one thing that would turn that around is going to Lambeau and winning, which is what happened. And so I'm with you 100% logically, of course, being, I guess, what they call purgatory. If you look around on Twitter, you're going to see that word a lot. Purgatory is not awesome because you're not getting the benefit of a high draft pick, but you're also not getting the benefit of being a serious contender for a Super Bowl, which is the ultimate goal. But I'm with you. I can't. I'm like, my football enjoyment is at a much lower level if I'm cheering for my favorite team to lose, and I cannot do that on Sundays. I will not. I hope my team loses. It's just that takes enjoyment out of it for me personally. So. And I'm not here to tell somebody, hey, if you want the Vikings to lose and you're a Vikings fan and you want them to lose because you want the draft pick situation, you can do that. Like, I have no issue with that.
I probably won't watch the game with you, though.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't either. I would separate myself from that person. But I do, I look at this schedule, and I think the Vikings are a very volatile team right now. They have
most volatile team.
They have obviously the Packers game, they dominated. You could look at the Seattle game and say that they dominated for 2/3 of that game. They can shown it with the most respected teams in the NFL right now. And then, of course, they played down to their competition quite significantly as well with Atlanta, especially is kind of the big name there. So I really don't know. I would put myself in the unsure category for that poll. They're going to probably beat Detroit at home, you'd think. Then they have Chicago, and if they, that's a division. That's 2 divisional games in a division that, if Green Bay, if they slip a little bit, this thing is not like the games are. Their Vikings are 3 games back, with some easy games on the schedule, easy in quotes. So like, there's a lot of football left. I know it's very dumb of me to get my hopes back up here, but I can't really help it. Like, I mean, you go into Lambeau, you beat a team that's 5-1. I'm sorry, my emotions are gonna take over a little bit there.
So to kind of put in perspective how stupid we're being by being emotionally attached to this team. So I'm looking at the rest of the schedule, and I'm with Drew that a lot of these games do look relatively favorable.
There's two tough games against NFC South, right? At Tampa,
right.
At New Orleans, I think. And those are the 2 that jump out as tough games to win.
Now, still, there's 9 games total. So 2 tough games, 7 games that, the Vikings are a swing team. You're right. They're the most volatile team in the NFL. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. But if they got hot, okay, there's 7 games on here that you should feel confident in. The problem with all of that, again, we go back to the fact that they're 2-5. They need to win 8 of these last 9 games, basically, to go 10-6 and have a position in the playoffs. There is a possibility that they could go 7-2 and sneak in at 9-7 as that number 7 overall seed, assuming the NFC West falls apart even more so, which I don't really think is going to happen based off how all those teams.
The Rams look pretty bad too.
But they looked pretty good 2 weeks ago. So that's my point here. Anyways, the Vikings need to probably win somewhere between 7 and 8 of their remaining 9 games. And on top of that, their conference record right now is 1-3. So that's really bad for tiebreaker moments. Now, that all being said, they've only played 2 games in the NFC North. So they could still theoretically go 5-1 in the North and have tiebreakers over Chicago and Detroit if it came down to it. And they just beat the Packers. So if, miraculously, if the Packers fall apart and the Vikings just, win every game, whatever, they would be in a position where they would come down to other tiebreakers. So looking at this, I think the Vikings can make the postseason if they win 7 of the remaining 9 games. But that being said, they need to win twice in Chicago. So they need to beat Chicago both times. They can't. I don't see a way for them to make the playoffs without beating Chicago both times.
Especially now since Chicago would be kind of a wild card contender at this point, right?
Exactly. Right. So they are like kind of your hottest. They're 3 games behind Chicago right now. Chicago is the first team out. And if the 7 teams that get in, Chicago's the first one out. They're 3 games behind Chicago. So in order to get in, they got to win 7 games. 2 of them have to be against Chicago, and 1 of the losses has to be against Jacksonville because it's an AFC team. It doesn't affect your conference record. Okay?
So I didn't consider that part.
So the fact that, is it possible? Yes. Is it realistic? No. Is it really unrealistic? Yes. Do I not care about any of that logic, and will I continue to root for this team? Yes, that's probably what's going to happen because I just don't know what you want me to do.
So here's the thing. I can't, I know one of those games that we're not calling quote unquote winnable is the Saints game.
Right.
The Vikings went to New Orleans and won the playoff game. And they just went to Lambeau and won against Aaron Rodgers. You can't tell me there's a 0 chance the Vikings go in on Christmas Day and beat the Saints, regardless of the circumstances, whether it means something or not. Which is the part of this that's kind of fun and, is entertaining about this team is you don't know which team's going to show up, which means they could compete against Kansas City Chiefs next weekend, or they could lose to the New York Jets. There's each of those possibilities can happen at probably an equal rate. So, I guess what we're hoping for, me and you, down the rest of the road is that the team that competes with the Chiefs shows up 9 times in a row, and they'll be, looking at a playoff spot. Seems realistic.
You look at the one thing I will say is that it's so much more difficult to look at, if you start 2-5, you just immediately write yourself off. There are plenty of playoff teams that finish a season 2-5, right? They started really, really hot, and they went 2-5 down the stretch. We never really look at that reverse, right? The quote backing into the playoffs teams. We never say, okay, well, they can't win the playoffs now because they're 2-5. Maybe, you kind of mention that, but you don't write them off as a non-contender. It's because the Vikings lost 5 of the first 7 games they played the year, and just odds tell you they probably won't, win enough games to make the postseason. Now, that being said, if they beat Detroit on Sunday, I don't think that game really matters. I'm not going to get too hyped over that. Like, I'll be excited as a Vikings fan, but I'm not long term. I'm not going to be like, oh, we're going to the Super Bowl now. No, that's not going to happen. But if they get to 4-5, beating Chicago in Chicago on Monday Night Football, and then all of a sudden, you got Dallas up next, Carolina following, Jacksonville. You can theoretically get to 7-5. I get it. I
Seriously, it's easy to talk yourself into it. It is, especially if that now of course we need to make sure we understand the Vikings' history at Soldier Field, especially when it comes to primetime games. Not good. And Kirk has been very bad in his 2 games at Soldier Field as Vikings quarterback. But the thing about those games is that it'll be a close game. The Bears are playing close games almost exclusively this year. And so that'll be, that's one of those where one play here or there could decide things. And if the Vikings come out of that game 4-5, I will be thinking playoffs, which is dangerous for my mental health. But I'm telling you that will be what I'm thinking if that's the case. And you get Detroit before that, you get Chicago Monday night. It could become a problem for me.
I could talk myself into this. I could.
Seriously, that's what I'm saying. I didn't even notice this until after the game yesterday. One of my buddies texted our group chat and goes, you look at that schedule, Vikings could easily win their next 5. And I was like, shut up. And then I look at who it is, and I'm like, oh, okay. Now I'm going to be, brought back into this optimism hype thing because Dallas looks terrible. It doesn't matter if it's Dalton or Dak Prescott earns $50 million by sitting on the couch with his ankle taped. And then you have Jacksonville, who Gardner Minshew's not their quarterback right now. I think he's hurt. They're going to throw a 6th-round rookie out there this week. Carolina, Teddy, that could be, they have a dangerous offense, but their defense isn't awesome. So, it's just, I don't know. It's easy to talk yourself into it. The Vikings really have one opponent the rest of the year that I'm, actually scared of, and it's Tampa.
Yeah, I'm with you. I get it. I get both sides, really. I understand if you're. I jumped off 2 weeks ago. I'm still off, but again, the more you talk about it, the more you kind of see the chips stack up. One thing that's in the Vikings' favor in terms of odds is, the law of averages is saying they can't lose any more 1-point games because they're 0% in that regard. And if they get into 2 close ones with Chicago to get back to the median,
Chicago needs to lose. Oh, they did just lose a close game, but they had been backing into wins for a few weeks there, so they're due to come back to earth a little bit as well.
So I think kind of the way to conclude this segment and as well as the show is just that you have to jump through a few hoops, but you can get there. You can. You can find a way to cheer for this team and believe, not just cheer, but believe in this team. There are ways to get there, and I think we just did a good job. But let us know where you're at with this too, because I'm genuinely I entered this show. Drew and I always have a short discussion before the show, kind of breaking down what we're going to talk about, and I straight up said I don't think so. I'm out, right? But we've been talking about this for what, 9 minutes, and I'm there. I can. This took 9 minutes, and I have optimism moving forward. I'm going to leave the show healthy and happy for the first time in 3 weeks. So
don't get too happy and healthy because it's one of the, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. Cautiously optimistic is the correct way to approach this, because if you get too optimistic, it's going to let you down. This team's going to let you down.
Yeah, and you're right. But I don't.
This is dangerous what we're doing. This is dangerous.
Yeah. Sorry. We apologize in advance for when the Vikings lose by 40 to Detroit on Sunday. But that all being said, let us know what you think, because I think a lot of Vikings fans are struggling with this. Obviously there's 50% of you who are done. You don't need to turn your TV sets on anymore, but about 50% of you guys who are still thinking about it. Either you're unsure or you're, riding the momentum like us. So let us know what you think. You can leave those comments on dailynorseman.com. I also check the YouTube comment section a lot too. I know we don't get a ton of viewers on there because, this is a podcast, but feel free to use that comment section as well. I appreciate that. I read that stuff, and it's fun to hear what you guys think, especially on these kind of topics where, like, there's no right answer here. There's no right way to be a fan. It's just, we're kind of challenging your belief system here. What's most important to you in your viewing experience. So let us know what you think. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. Make sure to check out the Climbing the Pocket Network. Everyone is doing a great job producing content. I believe we're on new content every single day of the week. You can find that on Daily Norseman or climbingthepocket.com. And yeah, so Drew and I will be back later on this week to discuss Detroit. And I will be bringing plenty of optimism for the reasons we just stated. Detroit just, they are, it's Detroit and Atlanta who love to fold. And I get that Detroit won that battle.
Adrian Peterson and Everson Griffin revenge games.
That too. I mean, this is going to be another fun one. So we'll talk with more enthusiasm later on this week as the Vikings hope to get to 3-5. And until then, enjoy this one for real. Like, I know it's only been 24 hours, but if you're not still enjoying the fact the Vikings won at Lambeau Field, like, this doesn't happen that much. So I don't care if it's a lost season or not. Enjoy that moment. Thank you for tuning into the show. Hopefully we didn't, scramble your mental health with our kind of illogical optimism here. But that being said, thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you later on this week.